Good morning, friends. I hope you're all doing well. You know, it's good to plan things out. It's good to have some forethought. But a mind that is compromised by drugs and alcohol, it can't think too far into the future. So Darlene and I, we didn't really plan things out very well, but we had this desire to make the great escape. And of course, the first attempt, I have to admit it was a failure. But, God's business is to turn failure into success. So our mind was kind of compromised with our habits, but we launched out into the woods. And I remember we took with us this little plastic bottle of honey. We were thinking that we would find wild blueberries and make blueberry jam because, homemade is better than buying it. Now, if that sounds a little crazy, but remember, that kind of mindset is what led us, when we finally got out into the woods, when we finally got out into the wilderness to live, that mindset led us to garden. And that really was a step toward God and a step toward some kind of real life. We were big into gardening. And that little canister of honey, we never did find any blueberries. But later we got beehives, and we started getting our own honey from our bees. And that was gardening in a place called Mentone, Alabama. I think I've got a few pictures I could put in here, but we had this garden. It was very large, had like 30 beds, and Darlene and I, we made all the beds together, lined them with rocks, put wood shavings and bark in the pathways, and we had a really an adventure there in the garden. We were learning things about God too. Didn't really go out into the garden to learn about God. But guess what? We found Him out there. You find these laws of Galatians 6:7, whatsoever man soweth, therefore shall he also reap. Reaping and sowing. You find the cause and effect. You find prevention better than cure. You find all of these laws in the garden. And as we garden day by day, the Lord spoke to us through the book of nature. Darlene and I, when we got out there in the wilderness, there was no bathroom. There was no bathtub. So we got an experience in the creek taking cold baths, and it was invigorating, and it was interesting. And after a time, we could see a lot of the conveniences that we took for granted, they just weren't there, and it was difficult. But it was educational, and we were gaining an experience finally. After being spectators in the book of nature, we were learning to be participants. And we ate a lot of granola. We didn't find those wild blueberries, but we had 50 pounds of granola. We had backpacks full of granola and dried milk, and we ate a lot of granola. And I like granola. And so as we were searching for blueberries and eating our granola, I stumbled upon a yellow jacket nest. Now I was highly allergic to yellow jackets. I must have gotten stung like 8, 9, 10 times. And it really kind of disturbed me. It distressed me because I thought, here I'm in the middle of nowhere, hours and hours and hours from the car, and I've been stung by all these yellow jackets. I don't know what's going to happen. Friends, we were no longer spectators. Now we were participants. And the strange thing is, I didn't have an allergic reaction. I couldn't believe it, but I didn't have one. And as we would sleep in our tent at night, there Darlene is laying there beside me in the tent. We're just talking. There's an absence of noise and absence of artificial light. And it's strange. Now, to say that absence and peace and quiet can speak to your heart, it doesn't sound normal, doesn't sound rational, but it did. The quietness in the nature, and you could hear whippoorwills, and you could hear some kind of night sounds. You see the moon, but it spoke to our hearts. And it really, it was good. We both could see there was a blessing to be had in living in nature. And years and years later, probably close to 10 years later, when I was just about to drink myself to death, God intervened in my life. In 1 John 4:19, I love Him because He first loved me. He sought me out, He found me, and He gave me some help. And one of the things the Lord asked me to do in that early part of the relationship, He brought me to a decision, either the booze or the Bible, because I had found the Bible and I was beginning to read it and I was still drinking, causing a lot of problems in our home. And the booze or the Bible? That was the question. Joshua 24:15, choose ye this day. God brought me to a choice. And I really struggled too. Because it was an old habit, and I really struggled. And so I tried to stop and I failed, tried to stop and I failed, I tried to stop and I failed, tried to stop again and I failed. Just had a lot of attempts and failure. But there's a principle in the Bible, Proverbs 24:16. A just man falls 7 times and he rises up again. So if you're failing, if you're trying and failing, you just keep trying. And if you keep trying, remember Jesus, Hebrews 12:2, is the author and finisher of our faith. It may take a while to finish the chapter with your name on it, but you keep trying and the Lord will bless you. And at some point in the future, He'll give you the victory. Jude 24, to Him that is able to keep you from falling. Finally, you fall, you rise up, and you don't fall again. But I was in the stage of falling and rising up and falling. But you know, the way I stopped, this flashback to that great escape in the North Georgia mountains, it gave me an experience. And that experience, you know, in Psalms 8, the verse is there in Psalms 8, that experience in nature helped me to stop drinking. Darlene and I, you know, I think I'd stopped for maybe 3, 4, 5 months. It was a long period of time. You know, I thought I'd finally gotten the victory. But we were driving back from Atlanta, going up Interstate 75. I got a craving for a beer. And I pulled off the interstate. You know, just as I veered off at the exit, Darlene looked at me. Somehow, wives have this sixth sense. They know what you're going to do. Darlene looked at me. She said, "What are you doing?" And I said, you know, I began to rationalize and justify. I said, "I'm a grown man. It's my money. I'm going to get a beer," you know, et cetera, et cetera. So I went into the store, came back with a 6-pack of beer, these tall 16-ounce beers. And as I took the beer out, because Darlene and I, we're Christians now. Darlene and I are now Christians. We're beginning to pray. We're reading the Bible. And we're having a good experience in our marriage. But the intruder, you know, the beer, it was still there. So Darlene looked at me, and as I opened the beer, she began to cry, just weeping. And as I lifted it to my lips, she said, "Please don't drink that. I want to be in heaven with you." You know, I just felt really kind of bad, but I drank it anyway. And so we drove home, back up into the woods. By the time we got there, I was partially drunk, and we had this argument, some disagreement. Darlene ran into the cabin that we had built with her own hands. I walked up into the garden that we were growing, just the two of us, in this beautiful lesson book of nature. And as I sat there in the garden, feeling, I don't know, just wretched, Psalms 8 verse 3 came to my mind, and it worked a change in my heart. When I consider the heavens, the work of thy fingers, the moon and the stars, which thou hast ordained. My dear friends, I'm looking at the moon and the stars. I am seeing what David wrote about in Psalms 8 verse 3. Which thou hast ordained. And as I look, you know, at the immensity, there's Orion, and there's all these, there's the moon, there's all these bright stars. Just tens of thousands of stars, just pitch black midnight, just a little bit of a moon, and all the stars in the heavens. And I looked down at the beer, and all of a sudden, the beer kind of began to shrink. And it didn't seem so important. And as I looked at the cabin where Darlene was inside, Darlene seemed to be, you know, getting bigger and bigger. Darlene was gaining in my eyesight an importance, and the beer was losing value. And I know it was being in nature. It helps you to make a true assessment, to see things as they really are. You don't strain at a gnat and swallow at a camel, Matthew 23:24. You don't do that anymore. Nature helps you to size things up, to really understand what's important and what is not. And that experience in our garden, which would come 10 years later after the great escape into the North Georgia mountains, that experience gave me a victory over the beer. And that was wilderness thinking. I was starting to learn that up there in the Cohutta wilderness. You know, we got some good experiences. You know, it would rain. And I don't think we had an umbrella. Get inside the tent, all wet and chilly and everything. The ground was hard. The people, Darlene and me, we were soft. We were not mountain man material, I found out. And so eventually, we left the woods. Went right back to the rat race. It was a failed attempt. But remember, God's business. Victory out of defeat. Success out of failure. And that was a step toward God. That was progress. Because once you get a taste of that kind of country living, once you have a taste of something real, once you see the daylight, you don't want to go back to the darkness. And so we came back out of the woods, but my dear friends, the Lord was cooking in the kitchen. He had a plan for our lives, and things would soon start unfolding in a way that I could never imagine, I could never have guessed. My dear friends, it is my sincere wish that God will give you an experience with Him. And if you're seeking to make the great escape, if you're kind of sick and tired of being sick and tired, if you're kind of bogged down and stuck in a rut, and you're looking to break out, I know somebody that can help you. May the Lord help you to be free in Him and to find the peace that passes understanding in this beautiful thing called the creation. God bless you, my friends. Have a nice evening.